They laughed at my flood berm, so I scheduled it for demolition. 3 days later, a storm rolled through and turned their laughter into $2 million worth of water damage. That's not me trying to sound dramatic. That's just how it happened. My name's Daniel Harper. I'm 46, retired civil engineer, spent a little over 20 years working stormwater and infrastructure for a mid-sized county in eastern North Carolina. Drainage basins, culverts, retention ponds, FEMA maps, that kind of thing. I'm not flashy. I don't golf. I don't belong to a country club. I like diesel engines, black coffee, and knowing exactly where water is going to move before it gets there. About 8 years ago, I bought a small house on a stretch of riverfront land just outside town. Nothing fancy. Vinyl siding, metal roof, gravel drive that crunches loud enough to wake the dead. But it sits 12 feet higher than the subdivision downhill from me. That subdivision is called Rivers Bend Estates. Big brick colonials, 3-car garages, manicured lawns so green they look photoshopped. Every mailbox matches. Every holiday wreath is approved by committee. And yes, there's an HOA. Now, I don't live in the HOA. My property predates their development by decades. My place is upstream, technically outside their jurisdiction, but water doesn't care about jurisdiction, and neither do gravity or physics. The first time I met the HOA president, her name was Cheryl Whitman. She came up my driveway in a white Lexus and stepped out like she'd just walked off a real estate commercial. She had this tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Harper," she said, looking around at my gravel, my truck, my stack of lumber. "We're concerned about runoff from your property." I almost laughed right there. I'd been designing runoff mitigation systems longer than her subdivision had existed. But she wasn't entirely wrong. Every hurricane season, this region gets hammered. Slow-moving storms that sit on top of you and dump inches per hour. I'd watched it for years while working for the county. Before Rivers Bend was built, the land downhill from me was open pasture and woodland. Water spread out naturally, soaked in, drained slow. Then came grading, compacted soil, driveways, rooftops, patios, all that impervious surface. They changed the hydrology of the entire slope. Nobody upstream asked for that. Nobody downstream asked me. After the first big storm post-development, I noticed something interesting. Water was backing up along the edge of my lower yard where the natural swale used to carry flow downhill. Their drainage pipes weren't sized for the increased velocity from upstream concentration. The grading altered sheet flow patterns. The result was a bottleneck right at the top of their first row of homes. So I did what engineers do. I measured. I ran flow calculations. I modeled peak discharge using updated rainfall intensity curves. I confirmed what my gut already knew. If a major storm hit at the wrong angle, Rivers Bend would flood from the top down, not from the river. And that's when I built the berm. 4 feet high, reinforced concrete core, rebar grid tied every 16 inches, anchored below frost depth. On the outside, it looked simple, maybe even crude, but it was positioned precisely along a contour line to intercept and redirect a portion of upstream runoff into a reinforced drainage channel that fed into an older culvert system the county had installed years ago. That berm protected my house, yes, but it also slowed and redistributed roughly 40% of peak stormwater that would otherwise accelerate downhill straight into Rivers Bend's basements. I didn't build it for them, but it helped them. For 3 years, no issues. Then property values climbed. New board members took over the HOA. And suddenly, my berm became an eyesore. I received the notice on a Tuesday afternoon. Cream-colored cardstock, laminated, official seal stamped in blue ink. It cited visual blight, unapproved structure affecting community aesthetic, potential alteration of historical drainage patterns. $1,000 per week in fines until removal. I stood in my kitchen reading it twice, then 3 times, and I actually felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something closer to disbelief. They'd never once asked me what the structure did. They never requested my drainage study. They just voted. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended purely out of curiosity, Cheryl stood at the front of the clubhouse with a laser pointer like she was defending a thesis. "We cannot allow unregulated structures that divert water flow," she said. I raised my hand. "It doesn't divert in the way you're implying. It attenuates peak discharge. There's a difference." A few heads turned. One guy whispered something about overengineering. Cheryl smiled thinly. "Mr. Harper, with respect, Your wall may protect your property, but our independent review suggests it interferes with natural flow. Who did the review? I asked. She hesitated. A consultant. I knew what that meant. Somebody's brother-in-law with a landscaping license. I offered to share my full hydrology report. I even brought copies. They declined. The vote was 4-1 in favor of enforcement. Remove the berm or face escalating fines and legal action. As I walked back to my truck, I heard someone behind me say, his cheap wall won't save him anyway when a real storm hits. I didn't turn around. Back home, I pulled out my old field laptop and reopened the models. I updated rainfall projections using the most recent NOAA intensity data. I recalculated peak flow without the berm in place. 8,500 gallons per minute during a moderate hurricane event. Over 11,000 during a severe one. Straight downhill. I printed the report, all 67 pages of it. Attached a cover letter. Sent it certified mail to the HOA board with a liability disclaimer. Owner assumes no responsibility for downstream water damage resulting from removal of upstream attenuation structure at request of Rivers Bend Estates HOA. And at the bottom, one simple sentence. Demolition scheduled for Thursday, 9 a.m., as requested. The next morning, Cheryl called. Her voice didn't have that polished Lexus shine anymore. Daniel, you're not seriously taking it down, are you? I looked out my window at the berm catching a light drizzle, doing its job quietly like it always had. You asked me to, I said. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, we think you're bluffing. I told her I don't bluff about water. And Thursday morning, a yellow excavator rolled up my gravel drive. Thursday morning came in gray and heavy, the kind of sky that feels like it's holding its breath. The excavator operator, a guy named Luis I'd worked with on county jobs years back, stepped out of his truck and looked at the berm, then at me. You sure about this, Dan? He asked quietly. Yep, I said, hands in my jacket pockets. They want it gone. He didn't ask more. Guys who work around dirt and steel learn when not to. By 9:15, the bucket bit into the first section. Concrete cracked with that deep, hollow thud that travels through your ribs. Rebar snapped and twisted like broken ribs sticking out of bone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It was methodical. Each section came down in measured cuts, 60 feet total scheduled for removal to satisfy the HOA's complaint about visual obstruction. I stood there the entire time, not smiling, not angry, just watching something I designed and poured with my own hands get peeled back layer by layer. Around 10:30, a white Lexus crawled halfway up my drive, but didn't come all the way. Cheryl sat inside, engine running. I could see her through the windshield, phone pressed to her ear, watching. By noon, the protective contour was gone. What remained was a clean slope, unobstructed, smooth, natural-looking, exactly what they'd asked for. Luis shut down the machine. Storm coming, he said, glancing at the sky. I know. That afternoon, the forecast shifted. Tropical Storm Iris had been wobbling offshore for days, projected to scrape the Outer Banks and head north. But by 5 p.m., the cone tightened. New models showed a stall pattern over our county. Rainfall projections jumped from 4 inches to 8, then 9. I didn't need the Weather Channel to tell me what that meant. I pulled the updated radar loops and ran quick back of envelope numbers on flow concentration time. With the berm gone, peak discharge would hit Rivers Bend within 40 minutes of sustained heavy rainfall. I slept fine that night. That might sound cold, but understand this. I'd given them the data. I'd warned them in writing. At some point, adults are responsible for their votes. Friday started calm. Humid. Too quiet. Around noon, the first outer bands rolled in, thin sheets of rain that misted sideways. By 3, it turned steady. By 5, it was relentless. 6 p.m., the rain rate hit an inch per hour. I walked down to the lower edge of my yard with a flashlight as dusk settled in. Water was already moving faster across the slope. Without the berm to intercept and redirect, it gathered momentum, merging into defined channels that hadn't existed the week before. 7 p.m., 2 inches accumulated. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Daniel, this is Mark Feldman, the HOA vice president said, voice tight. We're seeing some pooling near Alder Court. Is this normal? For this rainfall rate? I asked. It's just beginning. There was breathing on the other end. Then, Cheryl says you designed drainage systems. Is there anything we should be doing? Do you have temporary sandbags staged? I asked. Silence. Pumps. More silence. You voted to remove your mitigation structure, I said evenly. The flow path is what it is now. 8 p.m., rain intensified to nearly 2 inches per hour. I could hear it pounding my metal roof like gravel thrown by the sky. Downhill, porch lights flickered on one by one. Headlights cut through sheets of rain as neighbors moved cars to higher driveways. Water reached the first set of basement window wells around 8:30. I could see it from my upstairs window, a slow gathering shine under security lights. 9 p.m., the real surge hit. It wasn't a dramatic wall of water. That's not how it works. It was acceleration. Volume meeting slope with nothing to slow it down. The natural swale that once diffused flow was now a chute. 11,000 gallons per minute is hard to picture, but I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like every inch of lawn becoming a shallow river, like mulch beds liquefying, like patio furniture drifting inches at a time before someone grabs it too late. My phone started lighting up. First Cheryl. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Water is coming through the basement doors, she said, voice shaking. It's rising. How high? I asked. 6 inches, no more. Cut your power to the lower level, I said immediately. Shut off breakers. In the background, I could hear shouting. A child crying. Someone saying the sump pump wasn't keeping up. Another call came in. Then another. I let them go to voicemail. 10 p.m., 3 inches had fallen in less than 2 hours. The retention pond Rivers Bend relied on was already overtopped. Their storm drains, designed for a 10-year event, were choking under what was quickly becoming a 50-year rainfall. Around 11, I grabbed a rain jacket and walked halfway down the slope. Not into their property, just to the boundary line. Water was rushing past my boots in ankle-deep sheets, heading straight where my berm used to redirect it. And there, under porch lights and handheld flashlights, I saw homeowners standing in the rain, staring uphill at me. One of them, a tall guy named Brent who'd once joked about my doomsday bunker wall, shouted through the storm. Do something. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. This is something, I said quietly, though he probably couldn't hear me over the rain. Midnight. The first basement window failed. Water poured in with that ugly, heavy slosh you never forget. Within 30 minutes, several homes reported 2 feet of standing water downstairs. I went back inside, shut my door, and sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, listening. It's a strange thing, hearing a neighborhood panic in the dark. Car doors slamming, engines revving, people yelling measurements, 3 feet, 4 feet, the word mold already being thrown around. At 2 a.m., rainfall totals hit 9 inches in 6 hours. 17 basements flooded between 4 and 7 feet. 8 homes later documented foundation cracking from hydrostatic pressure against interior walls. Water had nowhere to dissipate gradually anymore. It hit fast, hit hard, and lingered. By dawn, the rain tapered to a steady drizzle. The neighborhood looked like it had been dunked in a lake. Lawns churned into mud. Debris scattered. Basement windows coated in brown streaks marking high water lines like grim little trophies. Around 6:30 a.m., I heard shouting from downhill. A crowd had gathered in Cheryl's driveway. I could make out fragments drifting up the slope. My kids were sleeping down there. The insurance won't cover flood. You said it was cosmetic. Voices overlapped, anger layered over fear. 2 men shoved each other. Someone called the sheriff. I didn't go down. Instead, I made coffee and opened my laptop. News alerts were already mentioning localized flash flooding in our county. Not catastrophic, not historic, just severe enough to cause damage in poorly mitigated areas. At 8:15, Cheryl called again. This time, she wasn't polished. She wasn't authoritative. She was crying. Total damage estimates are over $2 million, she said. Daniel, we didn't understand. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the stripped slope where the berm once stood. I tried to explain, I said. There was a long pause. What would it take to fix it? She asked finally. That was the moment everything shifted. Not the storm. Not the flooding. That question. Because now it wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about power. It was about consequence. I told her I'd run new numbers and call back. And as I closed my laptop, watching sunlight creep over soaked brick houses below, I realized this wasn't just a fight about concrete anymore. It was about control. And if you want to know what terms I set and why they signed them. When Cheryl asked what it would take to fix it, I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know. I knew exactly what it would take, but because I needed them to sit in it for a minute. Needed them to feel the weight of water the way I had felt the weight of that laminated violation notice in my kitchen. That morning the air smelled like wet drywall and churned earth. If you've ever walked into a flooded basement after the water starts to recede, you know that smell. It's not just moisture. It's insulation, carpet backing, paint, old boxes, childhood photo albums. It's people's lives steeping. I drove down around 9. Not to gloat. Not to parade around. I went because, engineer or not, I'm still a neighbor. The first thing I saw was a line of soaked furniture stacked along the curb. Sectionals split open at the seams. Mattresses sagging like tired lungs. Cardboard boxes disintegrating in the sun. Brent, the guy who'd yelled at me during the storm, was standing barefoot in his driveway, staring at a contractor van pulling up. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 days before. He saw me, and for a second I thought he might come at me again. But instead, he just shook his head slowly. "This didn't happen before," he said. "It did," I replied gently. "Just slower. That's the part people miss. Water has memory. It follows the path of least resistance. But when you change the landscape, you change its story." Cheryl's house had 3 industrial fans already set up in the garage. Her mascara had given up the fight. She waved me inside without saying much. The lower level of her home looked like a construction zone. Sheetrock cut out 4 feet high. Studs exposed. Dehumidifiers humming. "Our insurance adjuster says it's classified as surface water intrusion," she said flatly. "Flood exclusion applies." "Did anyone here carry separate flood coverage?" I asked. She shook her head. "You're half a mile from the river," she said defensively, like she was still trying to argue with physics. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a folder. Inside were updated flow models I'd run that morning. Revised attenuation requirements. Soil saturation factors based on current conditions. "If the berm had remained," I said calmly, "you likely would have experienced minor yard erosion. Maybe some window well seepage. What happened instead was concentrated, high-velocity discharge." Mark, the vice president, stepped in from the hallway. His voice was tight. "Are you saying this is our fault?" I met his eyes. "I'm saying you voted to remove a functioning mitigation structure after declining to review the supporting data." Silence settled heavy in that stripped-out basement. Cheryl sank onto the bottom step of her staircase. "What will it cost?" she asked again. Now we were talking in the right language. I laid it out clean. "To rebuild the berm, properly, at 6 feet instead of 4, with deeper footings and extended lateral spread to account for increased upstream runoff projections, including reinforced diversion channeling tide into county infrastructure, labor, materials, equipment, roughly $850,000. There was an audible inhale from Mark. $850,000, he repeated. "For shared protection," I said. "Divided across 34 homes. That's about $25,000 each. Less than what several of you are already looking at in basement remediation." Cheryl looked like she might faint. And I continued, because this part mattered more than the money. Permanent engineering oversight on any future grading or drainage modifications within the subdivision. No landscaping alterations that affect slope without professional review. Mark frowned. "You want veto power." "I want hydraulic integrity," I corrected. The meeting that followed wasn't pretty. By noon, word had spread. Homeowners packed into Cheryl's stripped living room, folding chairs set up between air movers and extension cords. Emotions were raw. Some blamed me. Some blamed the board. Some blamed the storm. An older couple named the Garcias stood up first. Their basement had held decades of family photos. "We voted with the board because we trusted you," Mrs. Garcia said to Cheryl, voice trembling. "We didn't know." That word again. "Didn't know?" Brent spoke next, arms crossed tight over his chest. "So we just pay him now?" he said, nodding toward me. "After all this?" I didn't rise to it. I just answered, "You don't pay me. You fund infrastructure that protects your homes. The alternative is hoping the next storm is gentler." A younger woman in the back, still in mud-stained leggings, asked quietly, "If we don't rebuild it, will this happen again?" "Yes," I said, "and possibly worse." No drama, no threat, just math. The board stepped into a side room to deliberate. Voices rose. Doors shut harder than necessary. It took 2 hours. When they came back out, Cheryl's face had shifted. The polished HOA president was gone. What stood there was a tired homeowner staring down a long payment plan. "We accept," she said. There were murmurs. Some angry, some resigned, but nobody proposed an alternative. The final agreement came in just under $900,000, including additional channel reinforcement and monitoring access. Structured over 15 years. Roughly $26,000 per household. Monthly assessments recalculated and legally binding. And yes, written into the covenant amendment was a clause granting me professional review authority over any drainage impacting change within Rivers Bend. Not because I wanted power, because I'd seen what happened without it. Construction began 10 days later. This time, when the excavator rolled up my driveway, no Lexus lingered at the bottom watching skeptically. Instead, a few neighbors stood quietly, coffee cups in hand, observing. The new berm rose higher. 6 feet. Thicker core. Extended length. It wasn't pretty in the way brick facades are pretty. It was functional. Solid. Quiet. During the pour, Brent walked up beside me. "Never thought I'd say this," he muttered, staring at the wet concrete settling into forms. "But I'm glad you're stubborn." I gave him a half smile. "Water doesn't negotiate," I said. It took 8 days to complete. 2 months later, another system rolled through. Not as severe as Iris, but steady and strong. For inches overnight. I stood at my upstairs window again, coffee in hand. Water gathered along the slope. Hit the berm. Spread. Slowed. Redirected. Downhill, lawns stayed lawns. Basement lights stayed on. No panic. No shouting. Just rain. The first monthly assessment check arrived 3 days early. Memo line read, "Upstream protection fee." That became the unofficial nickname for the berm. Kids riding bikes past it would joke about the big wall. Adults stopped calling it ugly. Some even asked if we could landscape around it. I allowed low-root native grasses. Nothing that would compromise structure. Here's the part that people argue about when I tell this story. Was I wrong to take it down? Some say I should have fought harder. Sued. Refused compliance. Protected them from themselves. Maybe. But here's what I learned after decades working public infrastructure. People don't value what they don't understand. And they don't understand what they've never had to pay for. I didn't flood their homes. The storm did. Gravity did. Physics did. I simply stepped aside when they insisted. Do I feel bad about the damage? Of course I do. I don't enjoy seeing families tear out drywall. I don't enjoy kids losing finished basements. But I also don't enjoy being dismissed by a committee that confuses aesthetics with engineering. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the only ones that stick. Now, every hurricane season, when forecasts start tightening and the air turns that familiar heavy gray, Rivers Bend doesn't debate drainage anymore. They call me. Not because I demanded authority, but because water earned it for me. So here's what I want to ask you. If you were in my position, would you have left the berm standing no matter what? Fought the fines? Gone to court? Or would you have done exactly what I did, handed them the data, stepped back, and let reality make the argument? Drop your take in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on it. Was this justice, stubborn pride, or something in between? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that thought landscaping was more important than infrastructure, I want to hear that too. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about revenge. It was about water. And water always wins.